I'm joined today by Dartmouth College assistant men's basketball coach Justin Bradley. And coach, I'm curious to know, do you have any personal experience with either unconstitutional nonviolent police harassment or with unconstitutional non-lethal police brutality?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think that's a great question. I think, you know, running through my head quickly, I can think of countless times and scenarios of being stopped, whether driving, whether walking down the street, whether, different scenarios where I have been questioned. And I always felt that it was questioned as if I had that the officers assumed that I had done something wrong instead of just genuinely looking for information. And so, the answer to that question is yes. No brutality, but definitely along the lines of just stern, harsh questioning and assumptions were being made. And I kind of had to diffuse the situations as best as I could.
So you've been pulled over when you were not committing a moving violation. Your tags weren't out. You didn't have warrants out. You were not speeding. They just pulled you over just for sort of some unknown reason. Call it
Oh,
suspicion.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. That's very common. I feel, I don't want to normalize it, but it's happened to me. I would, the very least 10 times in my life, and I'm 30. So, it's happening pretty frequently, but yeah, for sure. Without a doubt.
I'm glad you used the word normalization because one of the purposes of this project, which I call the Not Isolated Project, is I really want what Dr. King called the white moderates to connect the culture that permits systematic, nonviolent, unconstitutional police harassment of Black people with the culture that permits violence and murder of unarmed Black people. I
Yep.
really am wanting white people to understand there's a connection between those things culturally. And so and you brought up the normalization, and that triggers my mind that one thing I've noticed over the years in a lot of these conversations that comes up consistently is I'll ask Black friends to share their experiences, and sometimes initially the response might be, I've been pretty lucky. I haven't really had anything serious happen, right?
Yeah.
And there's a certain amount of something akin to survivor's guilt, where a Black person who gets pulled over for no reason but wasn't brutalized was pulled over. Where are you going? What are you doing in this neighborhood? What are you doing in this town? Just unconstitutional harassment. But ultimately, after 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, we're allowed to go on y'all's way. And it's
Yep.
kind of like it seems that to a certain extent, y'all feel guilty for complaining about that type of thing when people like George Floyd and Tamir Rice are too dead to complain. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad you used the word normalization because I think it's very important, even though they are normal, that they not be normalized.
Right.
The Black people have the same constitutional rights as any other person. And in talking with lots of my white friends over the years, it just doesn't happen to us. Unless, in my case, it's happened 3 times, but I was in a Black neighborhood all 3 times. So even
Right.
the times I was unconstitutionally, non-violently harassed, it was still based on police racism toward Black people because they couldn't figure out why a white person might be in a Black neighborhood for any purpose that was non-nefarious.
Right.
So even I, as a white guy, my experiences dealing with unconstitutional harassment were still related to racism against you, which is pretty startling to consider. And so my follow-up question is, you work in a lot of different environments and you're a sociable person, so you meet people well and you've got a large amount of friends and a diverse group of friends. I'm curious to know your closest circle of Black friends, what percentage of them roughly, I know you haven't done a formal survey, but what percentage of them roughly have had similar experiences to yours or worse?
Yeah, no, I think that's another great question. I think it's hard to put a percentage on, but if I had to, it would easily be above 90, if not 100. I would. I don't think I've ever talked to one of my closest friends or even another black person, quite frankly, that has said, "Oh, I've never experienced that," and that just doesn't happen. And if it has, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, I do have one black friend about my age who has never had it happen. And I said, oh, I got out of the habit of disbelieving black people decades ago. Right. When I first started hearing these stories, I was like, oh, come on. You must have been doing like 37 or 35. Like, come on. Like, these things don't. I'm talking about when I'm in high school. Right. It was
Yeah.
like just 30 years ago. I'm just getting my eyes open. Um, and um, I'm also, and he said that it's never happened to me, but I don't have any friends that hasn't happened to.
Yeah.
He called himself a unicorn. And I'm also curious, and I know that you may not be having the same conversations with white friends, but how often do you hear stories from your white friends about walking down the sidewalk with a group of friends, and the cops just pull up and demand to see everybody's ID? Or
Yeah.
a white person's driving in a white neighborhood and the cop just pulls them over. The tags weren't out, they weren't speeding. How often do you hear those types of stories from your white friends?
Very rare. Let me run through my Rolodex really quickly. I can't remember really any, without legitimately speeding or tags being expired or things like that.
So amongst your circle of black
Yeah.
friends, it's virtually 100% have experienced at a minimum unconstitutional nonviolent police harassment. And amongst your white friends, it's something close to 0% who've had those
Absolutely.
experiences. Am I understanding you correctly?
Very comfortable saying that, yes.
So given the information you've just shared, and considering that lots of white people insist that it's just a few bad apples and these are nothing but isolated instances, do you consider the related problems of nonviolent police harassment and police violence toward black people, do you consider these related problems collectively to be isolated, as lots of white people insist, or do you consider them to be more pervasive?
No, I think it's definitely from my own experience. It's without a doubt pervasive. Yeah, that's my short answer to it. It's, yeah, definitely pervasive.
Well, I appreciate you answering the formal the formal questions of the interview, the standard questions, I should say, not formal. And I'm curious now to know if you have anything you'd like to add, because I think it's always interesting to hear different perspectives. And just so people know a little bit about your background, it's a rather short list of people who've worked at both an HBCU and in the Ivy League, and also at Williams College, a very elite academically D3 college. So you've had you've had a wide variety of experiences and encountered a large circle, a diverse circle of friends and acquaintances. And I'm curious if there's anything else you'd like to add that you think maybe we might be missing or that you'd like to reinforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to share this story with you because, this has definitely been a relevant topic with our guys in our program, and our team at Dartmouth has gotten increasingly more diverse very quickly. So these conversations are coming up regularly, instructed by the coaches, but also led by the players. And, we asked, a lot of the black guys on the team are doing a lot of the talking over the last few weeks. And one of the guys challenged the white guys on the team to speak up and just say something or ask a question and one of the guys proposed a question. A black player proposed it to a white player about his experience driving and getting pulled over, and what kind of runs through their minds and what happens. And the white player was comfortably shared that, my first thought is, shit, was I actually speeding? Maybe. And excuse my language. The second thought is, I hope I have my license because sometimes I forget it at home. I just run out of the house. And the third thought is, hope my parents don't get upset with me because of the ticket that I may or may not receive. And I thought that was very honest and a very telling experience, especially because then the black player mentioned that his experience was very different, and I think we can infer what that looked like. Just fear and very cautious, and not knowing what the next 15 minutes would look like for his life, and that was very normal. So I think those experiences are real. Talking about them has been good for us, and I think this conversation with you is awesome.
Well, it reminds me of a story from my youth. I was 19 years old, freshman at the University of Texas, and one of my best friends from high school I played football with was a guy named Arnold. And Arnold's black, and Arnold came to Austin to visit. And as is pretty common with especially probably athlete teenagers, we're very competitive people, always giving each other a hard time. And I was a good high school player. That was the extent of my career. And when I got to college, started drinking beer, put on a lot of weight, and never played anymore. And we went to the park, and I was getting my ass whipped. And Arnold was used to me carrying the team to a victory. And that wasn't happening. I was getting my ass whipped. I was out of shape. And after we lost, Arnold's heated. And he's the whole way back to the car. You played like a boop. When you turn into a little boop. And I'm getting mad as shit. I'm like, man, I don't hoop anymore. And so finally I'm like, look, you need to shut the fuck up or you're walking home. And he goes, I hope you do make me walk home. I said, well, don't think I won't. He said, go ahead. And so I was like, all right, fine, fuck you. So I drove off. Okay. Now, 1 block away, I was like, man, he doesn't know Austin. He's been a dick, but this ain't right. So I U-turn, but he's gone, and I can't find him. Now, there's no cell phones at this time. So I go and round up some friends. We're all driving around looking for Arnold. Eventually, one of us finds him, and he is in tears. He's so upset and angry toward me, and he's not really much of a crier. And I apologize, but sort of half-heartedly, like, look, I am sorry I left you, but I mean, come on, you were being a dick, and he was. But what it took me years to realize, and what sparked me to want to tell this story, is you talking about the white kid being pulled over. I wonder if I have my ID. Well, I know the number. I'm sure it'll be fine. Yeah. Well, the reason Arnold was moved to tears with how frustrated and upset and angry he was toward me is that he didn't have his ID on him. And so he's walking around a strange town with no ID. And as a white guy, I don't understand that. Yeah. I can walk around in a strange town with no ID and like, what's the big deal? And well, in Arnold's mind, he felt that I had essentially put his life at risk.
Wow.
Because if the cops ask a black man for the ID and the black man says he doesn't have it, now the cops are going to automatically assume that he definitely has warrants out, is probably dangerous, is probably violent, and Arnold's big, which also doesn't help. Yeah. Like being black is hard enough when you're dealing with the police. Yeah. But if you're also very large, it's even worse. And it took me a long time to realize the privilege I enjoyed and not worrying about leaving the house without my ID.
Yeah.
Versus the fear and the trauma that causes a black person. And so even though I was one of those, I was not an overt racist when I was a high school kid. I was in elementary school. But as I got to know more and more black people, it's kind of like, okay, that's what's wrong with me. I started to deprogram and reprogram. But it took decades for me to have enough empathy to really try to put myself in Arnold's shoes. Yeah. And empathy is what is really missing. And so I hope the conversations like the ones that your kids are having, I'm sure that some of your white kids probably didn't speak up, but they were probably thinking, oh, come on, it's not you're acting like the cops just gunned down black kids left and right. What are you so afraid for? And it's because we as white people are not connecting the broken culture in policing. That if a cop's allowed to pull you over for no reason because you're black, why should you as a black person have an instinctive trust of that cop?
Sure.
Who's just already shown you he's a racist, or she's a racist by pulling you over for no constitutionally protected reason in the first place. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad you guys are having that conversation, and I'm really happy.
And that's real. And that's, one follow-up to that is, I asked a lot of, our white players on the team, like, when you see a cop around in any scenario, how do you feel? They're like, oh, I feel like I'm in a safe place. I feel like I'm protected. I feel like, okay, maybe this neighborhood wasn't so great, but the cops are here, so we're good to go. And I asked the same question to the black players, and they're like, anytime they see a cop, whether it's walking on campus, driving down the highway, outside of a gas station, they immediately tense up and think, oh shit, like I got to make sure I'm doing the right thing, even if you're pumping gas. So that's a real thing.
Yeah. And it's, again, so important for white people to have enough empathy to connect the unconstitutional harassment with the unconstitutional violence and murder. It's like white people look only at the murders and say, well, I read it's more likely to drown than die at the hands of a police officer when you're unarmed. So this feels like an overreaction, right? But they don't connect the broken racist culture that permits the less severe, non-life-threatening things to occur. And if we would, then we would understand that not only is it not irrational for black people to fear the police, it would be irrational for black people not to fear the police.
Right.
And I'm really hoping that these videos can play a small role in getting white people to understand that, because it ain't isolated. It's not isolated. And in my heart, I need to believe that if we can convince the majority white people to understand that, persuade them to understand that, then that's going to make the politicians actually do something. So, well, Coach Bradley, I really appreciate your time. I know that, especially with the 2022s just being okay.
Fired it up.
I know you got a call list out the wazoo, so I'll let you go. But again, I really appreciate your time, willingness to share your thoughts, and I hope that collectively, black people and white allies can convince an ever larger group of white moderates to jump off the fence onto the right side and not get back on the fence.
That's right.
It's not going to be, this is not a 2-week process. It's not a 2-year process. It's going to be a long process for our nation to finally get this right. So once again, thank you so much.
No, thanks, Coach Pete. Thanks for having me.